The first thing you need to understand about that night is that I should have been dead by morning. Not metaphorically, not in some dramatic sense, literally dead, throat torn open, blood pooling on the cracked linoleum of Ward 13's main corridor. But here I am, 3 years later, telling you this story because somehow, against every law of physics and sanity I thought I understood, I walked out of Millfield State Hospital at 6:17 a.m. on October 31, 2021, with my pulse still hammering and my voice still capable of screaming. My name is Marcus Chen, and until that night, I was just another guy picking up security shifts to pay off student loans. 24 years old, fresh out of college with a useless degree in philosophy and a burning need for rent money. The temp agency called it an overnight facility monitoring position, corporate speak for sitting in an empty building for 8 hours, making sure vagrants didn't break in and steal copper pipes. Easy money, they said. Nothing ever happens on the night shift, they said. Millfield State Hospital had been shuttered for 15 years when I got the assignment. The state had closed it down after a series of incidents, the kind bureaucrats discuss in hushed tones behind closed doors. Patient deaths that couldn't be explained. Staff members who quit mid-shift and refused to elaborate. Security footage that showed empty hallways one moment and then nothing. Just static. For hours. I arrived at 10:45 p.m., 15 minutes early because I've always been punctual to a fault. The November air bit through my jacket as I stood before the main entrance, a massive set of double doors that had once welcomed the desperate and the damned. Above them, carved in stone worn smooth by decades of weather, were the words, Millfield State Hospital, Healing Through Understanding C. 1924. The irony wasn't lost on me. Understanding. If the stories were true, the only thing anyone had come to understand in this place was fear. Dave Kowalski, the day shift supervisor, met me at the security office. A cramped room just inside the main entrance filled with monitors showing feeds from cameras that still worked. He was a heavy-set man in his 50s, with tired eyes and the kind of mustache that had been out of style for 30 years. "You the new guy?" he asked without looking up from a crossword puzzle. "Marcus something?" "Marcus Chin, yes sir." Dave finally looked at me, his eyes taking in my cheap security uniform and nervous energy. "First time in an old hospital like this?" "First time doing security period," I admitted. Dave grunted and stood up, his joints creaking like the building itself. "All right, kid. Here's what you need to know. You got 27 cameras, but only 19 work. The ones that don't work are marked with red tape on the monitor. Don't bother trying to fix them. Maintenance gave up years ago." He handed me a heavy ring of keys, at least 30 of them, all different sizes and shapes. "These open everything that still locks. Most doors are just jammed or rusted shut anyway. You do 3 walks per shift, midnight, 2 a.m., and 4 a.m. Check the main floors only. Basement and 4th floor are off-limits." "Off-limits why?" Dave paused, his hand already on the door handle. "Structural damage. Real bad up there. Basement's flooded. You go in either place, you're on your own if something happens. Insurance won't cover it, and we can't send anyone after you." Something in his tone made me press further. "Has anyone ever?" "No," Dave cut me off. "No one's ever gone up there. And you won't either, if you're smart. Radio's on channel 7 if you need anything, but don't expect an answer after midnight. I'll be back at 7 a.m. sharp." The first hour passed without incident. I familiarized myself with the security office, tested the radio, static on all channels, and reviewed the building layout. Millfield was massive, 4 stories, 6 wings, over 300 rooms. The architectural plans showed everything from patient rooms to surgery suites to something ominously labeled Treatment Room C in the basement. At 11:47 p.m., I made my first discovery. Camera 12, which monitored the main corridor of Ward 13, showed something that made me lean forward and squint at the grainy black and white feed. For just a moment, maybe 3 seconds, there appeared to be someone walking down the hallway. A tall figure in what looked like a hospital gown, moving with an odd, shuffling gait. I blinked, looked again. The corridor was empty. I rewound the footage, but the DVR only kept a 30-second buffer, and whatever I'd seen was already gone. Probably just shadows from the emergency lighting, I told myself. Old buildings play tricks on you. The midnight walk was routine. I grabbed my flashlight, a heavy mag light that doubled as a decent weapon, and made my way through the building's main arteries. The hospital smelled like every abandoned building you've ever been in: mold, decay, and something else. Something organic and sour that seemed to come from the walls themselves. My footsteps echoed in the long corridors, bouncing off peeling paint and water-stained ceiling tiles. Every so often, I'd pass a patient room with its door ajar, and my flashlight beam would sweep across empty bed frames and forgotten medical equipment. In one room, I found a child's drawing still taped to the wall, a crayon sketch of a family standing outside a house, everyone smiling. The paper had yellowed with age, and moisture had warped it into something that looked more like a funhouse mirror reflection. It was in Ward 7 that I heard the first sound that didn't belong, coming from somewhere ahead of me in the corridor. I stopped walking and listened, my breath forming small clouds in the cold air. The sound continued for maybe 10 seconds, then stopped as abruptly as it had started. "Hello," I called out, immediately feeling foolish. My voice carried down the hallway and came back to me distorted, stretched thin by the architecture. Nothing. I completed the walk without further incident and returned to the security office. The coffee Dave had left behind was still warm, and I poured myself a cup, grateful for the bitter comfort. On the monitors, everything looked normal. 19 working cameras showing 19 empty sections of the hospital. At 1:33 a.m., the lights went out. Not all of them. The emergency lighting stayed on, casting everything in a hellish red glow that made the shadows deeper and more menacing. The monitors flickered but remained operational, powered by the backup generator that kicked in with a diesel growl somewhere in the building's bowels. I tried the radio. "Security to maintenance, we've got a power failure at Millfield. Anyone copy?" Static. I tried my cell phone. No signal. Not unusual in a building like this. The thick walls and metal infrastructure created a natural dead zone. But the timing felt wrong. Too convenient. That's when I noticed something on camera 15, which monitored the intersection where 3 corridors met near Ward 13. A shadow was moving across the floor. Not the random dance of emergency lighting, but something with purpose. Something shaped like a person. I switched between cameras, trying to track the movement. Camera 16, empty hallway. Camera 17, the shadow again, larger now, closer to the camera. Camera 18, nothing. Camera 19, a figure standing directly in front of the camera, face tilted up toward the lens. The image was grainy, distorted by the low-light camera, but I could make out enough details to feel my blood turn to ice water. So, impossibly thin. Wearing what looked like a hospital gown that hung in tatters around a skeletal frame. And the face, I couldn't see the face clearly, but I could see the eyes. They reflected the camera's infrared illumination like an animal's, 2 bright points of light in a darkness that seemed to swallow everything else. The figure stood there for nearly a full minute, perfectly still, staring directly into the camera. Then it turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows beyond the camera's range. My hands were shaking as I reached for the radio again. "This is Marcus at Millfield. I need someone here now. There's someone in the building." The radio crackled, and for a moment I thought I heard a voice. But when I turned up the volume, it was just static shaped like whispers. I knew I should stay in the security office. Lock the door, wait for dawn, and let someone else deal with whatever was wandering the halls. But something about that figure on the camera had looked familiar. Not the face, I'd never seen that face before. But the way it moved, the way it had stood there watching. It reminded me of something, some half-remembered dream or nightmare. At 2 a.m. sharp, I made a decision that probably saved my life, though at the time it felt like the stupidest thing I could possibly do. Instead of doing my scheduled walk through the main floors, I was going to find that figure and confront it. Better to know what I was dealing with than spend the next 5 hours jumping at shadows. I grabbed my flashlight and headed for Ward 13. The walk to Ward 13 felt like a journey into the Earth's core. The emergency lighting created a hellscape of red shadows and deeper darkness, and every few steps I had to stop and listen. The hospital had developed a voice in the darkness, creaking beams, settling foundation, the whisper of air moving through broken windows. But underneath it all, I swear I could hear breathing that wasn't mine. Ward 13 had been the psychiatric wing. The doors here were different, reinforced steel with small windows set at eye level, designed to contain rather than welcome. Most stood open now, their locks long since broken or rusted away. But a few remained sealed, and as I passed them, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from behind that scratched and pitted glass. I found the intersection where camera 19 was mounted. The lens stared down at me like a dead eye, its infrared illuminator casting a faint red glow in the darkness. This was where the figure had been standing, where it had looked directly into the camera with those bright, animal eyes. The floor here was different. Where the rest of the hospital showed the expected decay, dust, debris, water damage, this spot was clean. Not hospital clean, but clean in the way that a grave is clean after the earth has settled and the flowers have died. As if nothing organic could survive here long enough to decay. That's when I heard my name. Marcus. Not shouted or whispered. Spoken in a conversational tone, as if someone was greeting an old friend. The voice came from behind me, back the way I'd come. I spun around, flashlight sweeping across empty corridor, but there was nothing there. Who's there? I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. This is a secure facility. You need to leave immediately. Silence. Then footsteps. Not the sharp echo of shoes on linoleum, but the soft, shuffling sound of bare feet. They were coming from ahead of me now, deeper in Ward 13, moving away from me down the corridor. I followed. I know how that sounds. Horror movie protagonist making the worst possible decision. But you have to understand, by this point my rational mind had already snapped. Nothing about this situation made sense within the framework of reality I understood. A part of me was convinced I was having some kind of breakdown, that the stress of student loans and dead-end jobs had finally caught up with me and I was hallucinating the whole thing. The footsteps led me deeper into Ward 13, past patient rooms filled with the ghosts of psychiatric care. In one room, I glimpsed the remains of restraint equipment, leather straps and metal fixtures bolted to a bed frame. In another, the walls were covered with scratches, gouged deep into the plaster by fingernails or worse. Someone had carved words into the paint. There in the walls, and don't let them sleep, and in letters that seemed to pulse in my flashlight beam. The footsteps stopped at the end of the corridor, where a stairwell led up to the 4th floor, the floor Dave had warned me about, the one that was supposed to be off-limits due to structural damage. Marcus. The voice again coming from the stairwell. Closer now. I aimed my flashlight beam up the stairs and saw them, wet footprints on the concrete steps, leading up into darkness. I climbed those stairs. Each step felt like a small betrayal of my own survival instincts, but something was pulling me upward. Not literally, I wasn't possessed or under some supernatural compulsion. It was more like the feeling you get when you're standing at the edge of a cliff and part of your brain whispers, jump. The call of the void. The need to see what happens when you stop playing it safe. The 4th floor was different from the rest of the hospital. The walls here weren't the institutional green of the lower floors, but a stark white that had yellowed with age and water damage. The ceiling was lower, more oppressive, and many of the light fixtures had fallen, leaving twisted metal and shattered glass scattered across the floor. But it wasn't structurally damaged. Not in the way Dave had implied. The floor was solid beneath my feet. The walls showed no signs of serious compromise. This had been a lie, a story to keep people away from something else entirely. The wet footprints continued down the main corridor, and I followed them past rooms that were different from the patient quarters below. These had been offices, consultation rooms, and something that looked like a small surgical suite. At the end of the corridor, the footprints led to a door marked the door was ajar. Light was coming from inside, not the red emergency lighting, but a clean, white fluorescent glow that shouldn't have been possible with the power out. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was pristine. Not just clean, but perfectly preserved, as if someone had been maintaining it for 15 years. The electroconvulsive therapy equipment sat in the center of the room. A bed surrounded by machines that looked like they belonged in a museum of medical horrors. Thick leather straps hung from the bed's sides, and nearby, a cart held various metal instruments that I couldn't identify but instinctively feared. But what drew my attention wasn't the equipment. It was the walls. They were covered with photographs. Hundreds of them, pinned up in neat rows that covered every available surface. Black and white portraits of patients, some smiling, some screaming, some with expressions so vacant they might have been corpses. In the center of the largest wall, someone had pinned up a single-color photograph that made my blood freeze in my veins. It was me. Not a recent photo, but me as a child, maybe 7 or 8 years old, standing in front of a house I'd never seen before. I was smiling in the picture, but my eyes had a distant, unfocused quality that I recognized from some of the other photographs on the walls. I turned around. The figure from the camera was standing in the doorway, and in the fluorescent light, I could see it clearly for the first time. It was tall and emaciated, wearing a hospital gown that was clean despite its tattered appearance. But the face was what made me understand everything. It was my face. Not exactly. This version was older, thinner, marked by suffering I'd never experienced. But the bone structure was identical, the eyes the same dark brown, even the small scar above the left eyebrow that I'd gotten falling off my bike when I was 6. I'm what you were supposed to become, it said, and its voice was my voice, pitched just slightly lower, roughened by years of screaming. Before they let you go. Before they decided the treatment wasn't working. Memories crashed over me like a tide. Not my memories, someone else's memories, from a life I'd never lived. Being brought to Millfield as a child. The diagnosis, severe dissociative disorder with violent tendencies. The treatments. The electricity coursing through my brain while doctors watched and took notes. The steady erosion of everything that made me human. They released you when you were 9, the figure continued. Said you were cured. But they kept me. I was the part they cut away, the part they thought was dangerous. I've been waiting here ever since, growing stronger while you lived the life that should have been mine. I whispered. That's impossible, I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I knew they weren't true. The memories weren't mine, but they felt real. The smell of antiseptic and fear. The feeling of leather straps cutting into my wrists. The bright light of the ECT machine charging up, and then, nothing, the figure said, reading my thoughts. Nothing for weeks at a time. They took everything that made you dangerous and locked it away in here. But you can't destroy a soul, Marcus. You can only hide it. It stepped closer and I could smell it now, not the decay I'd expected, but something clinical and cold, like formaldehyde. I've been alone for 15 years. Do you know what 15 years of solitude does to a mind that was already broken? I've had nothing but time to think, to plan, to grow stronger. What do you want from me? I want what was taken from me. I want to live again. I want to feel sunlight on my skin and taste food and sleep in a real bed. I want the life you stole from me. The figure raised its hand, and I saw that its fingernails had grown long and sharp during its years of isolation. It's simple, Marcus. I take your body and you take mine. You stay here and I go back to the world. And if I refuse? It smiled, and I saw that its teeth had been filed to points. Then I take it anyway, and your consciousness gets torn apart in the process. This way, at least part of you survives. I looked around the room at the photographs of all the patients who had suffered here, at the pristine equipment that had been used to lobotomize minds and steal souls. And I realized that this thing, this shadow of myself, was right about one thing. It had been wronged. Whatever had been done to me as a child, it had created this broken reflection that had suffered in isolation for 15 years. But I also realized something else. It wasn't just asking for my life. It was asking me to become complicit in its escape, to help it unleash 15 years of accumulated rage and madness on an unsuspecting world. No, I said. The figure's expression changed, the false humanity draining away to reveal something predatory and alien. Then you've chosen suffering. It lunged at me with inhuman speed, those sharpened nails reaching for my throat. But I was ready. As it moved, I grabbed the nearest piece of medical equipment, a heavy metal restraint from the ECT bed, and swung it with all my strength. The metal connected with its skull with a sound like breaking glass. The figure stumbled backward, dark fluid, not quite blood, streaming from the wound. But it didn't fall. Instead, it began to laugh. You can't kill what's already dead, Marcus. You can't destroy what you created. But I had heard it. Whatever this thing was, it could be damaged. And if it could be damaged, maybe it could be stopped. I didn't wait to find out if I was right. I ran. The corridor outside the ECT room had changed. The walls were moving, not obviously, but with a subtle shifting that made me dizzy and disoriented. The fluorescent lights flickered and sparked, casting wild shadows that seemed to reach for me as I passed. Behind me, I could hear the figure following, its bare feet slapping against the linoleum with a wet sound that made my skin crawl. I reached the stairwell and took the steps 3 at a time, my flashlight beam dancing wildly as I fled. The building seemed to resist my escape. Doors slammed shut on their own, hallways stretched longer than they should have, and the emergency lighting flickered like dying fireflies. "You can run, Marcus," the figure's voice echoed from the stairwell above me, distorted by the architecture until it sounded like the building itself was speaking. "But you can't run from yourself. I am you, and you are me, and we will always be connected." I burst through the door leading back to Ward 13, but the corridor I emerged into wasn't the same one I'd left. The patient room doors were all open now, and from each one came a soft, rhythmic sound, the same tapping I'd heard earlier in the night, like fingernails against glass, or teeth against metal, or bones against stone. As I ran past the open doors, I caught glimpses of what was inside. Not empty rooms, but rooms filled with figures, dozens of them, all wearing the same tattered hospital gowns, all with the same emaciated frames and bright, reflecting eyes. They were watching me run, and as I passed each door, they began to follow. The hospital had become a maze. Corridors that should have led to the main entrance instead curved back on themselves. Stairwells that should have descended to the first floor instead spiraled up into darkness. And behind me, the procession of hospital gowns grew larger, their bare feet creating a sound like rainfall on the linoleum floor. I found myself back at the security office, though I couldn't remember taking the path that should have led there. The monitors were still functioning, but now instead of showing empty corridors, they showed me dozens of different angles of my terrified face, running through hallways that stretched and contracted like the inside of some vast organism. That's when I understood. The hospital wasn't just a building, it was a trap. A psychological maze designed to contain minds that had been broken by its treatments. And I was trapped inside it, along with all the other fragments of consciousness that had been cut away and abandoned here. But understanding the trap also gave me the key to escaping it. If this was a psychological construct, then it followed psychological rules. And the most important rule of any psychological trap is that it only has power if you believe in it. I closed my eyes and forced myself to remember who I was. Not the child who had been brought here, not the fragment that had been left behind, but Marcus Chin, 24 years old. Philosophy degree. Student loans. Bad job prospects, but a functioning mind that had never been touched by ECT or any other form of psychiatric mutilation. When I opened my eyes, the security office was just a security office. The monitors showed static. The corridor outside was empty. And though I could still hear the sound of bare feet on linoleum, it was distant now, fading like the memory of a nightmare. I spent the remaining hours until dawn in that office, watching the static on the monitors and listening to the building settle around me. Every few minutes, I would hear something, footsteps, voices, the sound of metal against metal, but I didn't investigate. I'd learned the difference between curiosity and stupidity. At 6:17 a.m., exactly as he'd promised, Dave Kowalski knocked on the security office door. I opened it to find him standing there with 2 cups of coffee and a tired smile. "How was your first night?" he asked, handing me one of the cups. I looked at his face, searching for any sign that he knew what had happened. But his expression was genuinely curious, nothing more. "Quiet," I said. "Nothing happened." "That's good. Sometimes new guys get spooked by the old places like this. You'd be surprised how many quit after one shift." "Speaking of which," I said, "I won't be coming back." Dave nodded, not seeming surprised. "I figured. You got that look." Most guys who see what you saw don't come back. What look? He pointed to the mirror behind the security desk. I turned to look at my reflection and felt my blood turn cold. The face looking back at me was my own, but the eyes had that same distant, unfocused quality I'd seen in the photographs on the ECT room wall. What happened to me? I whispered. Nothing that wasn't already there, Dave said quietly. Millfield doesn't create anything new. It just shows you what was always hiding underneath. I left Millfield State Hospital that morning and never went back. I tried to return to my normal life, but normal had become a relative concept. Food tasted like cardboard. Colors seemed muted. Sleep brought dreams of white corridors and the sound of bare feet on linoleum. It took me 3 months to understand what had really happened that night. I hadn't escaped the hospital, I'd made a trade. The figure I'd encountered, the shadow of myself, had let me go. But in exchange, it had taken something from me. Not my body or my life, but something more subtle and more precious. It had taken my capacity for genuine emotion. I could still feel happy, sad, angry, afraid, but these emotions felt artificial now, like stage makeup applied over scar tissue. The deep, abiding sense of being fully alive had been surgically removed, just as cleanly as if I'd undergone ECT after all. 6 months after that night, I did something I'd sworn I'd never do. I went back to Millfield State Hospital. Not inside, I'm not stupid, but I spent a morning in the county records office, searching through old files and newspaper archives. What I found confirmed my worst suspicions and revealed an even more terrible truth. There had been a Marcus Chen admitted to Millfield in 1998. Age 7. Diagnosed with severe dissociative disorder following a traumatic incident that the records didn't specify. He had undergone experimental ECT treatments for 2 years before being released in 2000 as successfully treated. But according to the records, Marcus Chen had died 3 weeks after his release. House fire. His adoptive parents had also died in the blaze, which investigators had ruled accidental despite evidence of accelerant use. The Marcus Chen who had grown up, gone to college, and taken a security job at Millfield had never existed. Or rather, he had existed only as a construct, a false identity created by whatever fragment of consciousness had escaped from Ward 13 20 years ago and managed to build a life in the outside world. I am the shadow. I am the thing that escaped. The real Marcus Chen died 20 years ago, and I am nothing but his discarded psychological refuse, somehow given form and consciousness and the delusion of having lived a normal life. The figure I encountered in Ward 13 wasn't my dark reflection, it was the original. The real Marcus Chen, or what was left of him after 2 years of ECT treatments and 15 years of isolation. And when I refused to trade places with him, he had simply reclaimed what was rightfully his. I'm no longer sure what I am. A ghost? A walking delusion? A fragment of a broken mind given independent existence? I have no family, no friends who knew me before that night. Even my college records, when I tried to verify them, seemed somehow insubstantial, as if they might fade away if examined too closely. But I am still here, still conscious, still capable of telling the story, even if I'm no longer sure whether I'm telling it to you or to myself. Sometimes, late at night, I hear the sound of bare feet on the floor above my apartment. And sometimes, when I look in the mirror, the reflection that looks back has sharper teeth than I remember having, and eyes that reflect light like an animal's. I think the real Marcus Chen is still in there, sharing this borrowed existence with me. Waiting, planning, growing stronger while I grow weaker. And one day, maybe tomorrow, maybe next year, maybe when I'm old and my grip on this false reality finally loosens, he will take back everything I stole from him. The truth is, I'm not telling you this story as a warning or a confession. I'm telling it because I need you to believe it happened. Because as long as someone believes in Marcus Chen, even the false Marcus Chen that I am, I continue to exist. So please remember this story. Remember me. Because forgetting is another kind of death, and I'm not ready to die again. Not yet.